my message along the life of a woman named Madalyn Murray O'Hair. Just out of curiosity, with a show of hands, how many of you guys have heard of her? Anybody? A few of you? She was pretty famous back in the 60s and 70s, but we'll get to know a little bit more about her. Madalyn Murray O'Hair was born on April 13, 1919 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, into a poor family to church-going parents that many people claim, many people believe that her parents were Christians. Madalyn claimed that she became an atheist at a very young age after reading the entire Bible, despite of what her parents taught her and what her parents did. Her rather infamous claim to fame, if you will, came in 1960 when Madalyn contested the required moment of prayer and Bible reading in her son William's Baltimore area school. Her case, Murray versus Curlett, consolidated or combined with a second lawsuit, went to the Supreme Court, and on June 17, 1963, the Supreme Court delivered an 8-1 verdict in favor of O'Hair, which effectively banned mandatory Bible recitation and Bible reading along with prayer at all public schools in the United States. What really stuck out to me about this was before this lawsuit, before 1963, it was mandatory. It was required that you pray and read the Bible in school. And Madalyn evidently had a serious issue with this. Later in 1963, O'Hair went on to found a group called American Atheist, which to this day remains one of the most active atheist groups in the United States. It's still going on. They're still, if you dare, I guess you can Google it. They just stand for everything that's evil. They stand against everything that's good and right. O'Hair had two sons, the older one, William, or more commonly known as Bill Murray, and his younger brother, John Garth Murray. John lived a pretty short, simple life. He was under the influence of his mother's overpowering shadow of evil and was active at American Atheists until the time of his death in September of 1995. Bill Murray, this is the older one, or William, lived a very troubled life of alcoholism, failed marriages, and trouble with the law while he was associated with his mother, an American atheist, until he became a born-again Christian in 1980 at the age of 34. In 1982, Bill founded the Religious Freedom Coalition, which is still very active in Washington, D.C. to this day. Bill Murray is an active author, minister, and he currently serves as the chairman of the Religious Freedom Coalition at the age of 71. He's currently 71 and he's still very active. He's still writing books, he's a pastor, and he's the president of the Religious Freedom Coalition. Bill Murray has authored many books, including My Life Without God and Let Us Pray, a plea for prayer in our public schools. Let Us Pray, a plea for prayer in our public schools. Murray is actively fighting against everything that his mother accomplished in her lifetime, along with restoring prayer and Bible reading back into public schools. So while Madalyn Murray O'Hair failed to accomplish God's plan for her life, her son Bill managed to escape her grasp, and he committed his life to Christ, and he seems to have found God's calling in his life. Bill's ministry has impacted thousands of lives with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So what is God's plan for our lives? See, our plans aren't all going to be the same. We each have God has an individual plan for each one of us. First of all, I believe that it's important for us to think about this verse from Jeremiah 1:5 for just a minute. I know that we're all very familiar with this verse, but I believe it's important maybe that I read it now just to kind of remind us from where we came from. Jeremiah 1:5, Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. In other words, God knew us before we were anything. God knew us before we were even a twinkle in our daddy's eye, if you will. We were nothing and God knew us. It's important to remember that God knows the end from the beginning and that He has a special plan for each one of us. You know, that's why the teaching of evolution is so dangerous. They try to do away with any kind of a higher power. They try to do away with any kind of a deity. You know, they say that we just live for a while and then we're gone. We're nothing. Then it's over. And that's why it's so dangerous. See, if we just came from a monkey and started walking on earth, we have no goal, we have no life, we have no plan. We live for a while and then we're gone. I follow AIG, Answers in Genesis, Brother Ken Ham. He started the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum and all these things. And the media is just so, I was wondering, why do they attack Brother Ken so much? And I noticed in the news the other day, I came across an article about all these empty parking lots at the Ark Encounter and at the Creation Museum. He's failing, he's not getting anywhere. People aren't interested in that trash, while he is at the same time posting live videos and pictures of overflowing parking lots, tens of thousands of people every day. In fact, they're doubling their parking lot at the Ark Encounter. See, they don't want him to teach that God has a plan and a purpose for our lives, and He is the author and the creator of everything. So anything that's good and right, they're doing away with. Jeremiah 29, verses 11 through 13, and some of this stuff isn't King James. I'm a King James guy, but some of this is NIV. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. See, God knows the plans that He has for us. They're plans to prosper us, plans to give us hope and a future. Not just any future, not just a dismal future, the future. God has the future for us. The plans that God has for us are far greater, and they are far beyond anything that we can think of or imagine. His plans are greater than anything that any of us can accomplish on our own and without Him. Even if we were to accomplish something astronomical in our lives in the eyes of the world, if it is outside God's will and it is not His plan for our lives, what is it really worth in the scope of eternity? I'm just using this guy as an example. When Mark Zuckerberg stands before God to give an account of his life, he tells God, well, I invented Facebook, I became a billionaire many times over, and I helped millions of people go online and to connect with each other, and maybe gossip a little bit too. You know, is that really what God's going to care about? Mark Zuckerberg took the spot here for a few hours the other day as the world's richest man when the stocks were up. When they came down again, Gates, I think, slid back in. But, you know, God's going to say, hey, what about me? What did you do for me? See, this stuff isn't going to count. It looks good to us. It's probably good for Him, but it's not going to count in the scope of eternity. I want to read a couple of paragraphs to you from a book I'm currently reading by Rick Warren. And this was really good. I tried to be original, but this really fit in here. And this is Rick Warren writing. In California, where I live, many people have moved from other parts of the country to work here, but they keep their citizenship with their home country. They are required to carry a visitor registration card, also known as a green card, which allows them to work here even though they are not citizens. Christians should also carry spiritual green cards to remind us that our citizenship is in heaven. God says that His children are to think differently about life than the way unbelievers do. All they, unbelievers, think about is life here on earth, but we are citizens of heaven where the Lord Jesus Christ lives. Our identity is eternity, and our homeland is heaven. When we grasp this truth, we will stop worrying about having it all here on earth. God is very blunt about the danger of living for the here and now and adopting the values, priorities, and the lifestyles of the world around us. When we flirt with the temptations of this world, God calls it spiritual adultery. It is a fatal mistake to assume that God's goal for our lives is material prosperity or popular success as the world defines it. The abundant life has nothing to do with material abundance. Never focus on temporary crowns. End of quote. Never focus on temporary crowns. See, and that's all this stuff is here. All the material things in this world is a temporary crown. You know, I believe we won't be in heaven for 2 seconds and we're going to think, you know, why did I put so much effort? Why did I put so much work into a temporary crown? Because for all of eternity, those 80 years, it'll be gone. It won't be anything. Why do we put so much effort into temporary crowns? You see, life is only a temporary assignment. The Bible compares our life on earth to temporarily living in a foreign country. In Psalm 119, David said, I am but a foreigner here on earth. Do not hide your commandments from me. In 1 Peter 1:17, Peter said, if you call God your Father, live your life as temporary residents here on earth in fear. Peter also used the words alien and strangers in the world when referring to the Christians. Alien simply means foreigner or belonging to a different country. So if I'm an alien here on earth, I am a native of heaven. The Bible also uses terms like pilgrim, visitor, and traveler to describe our brief stay here on earth. James chapter 4 verse 14, whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. Just like that, it's gone. David wrote again in Psalm 39:4, show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. Brief. It's just brief. It's short-lived is what fleeting means. The reason I'm pointing these things out is because we need to come to the realization that we are, as Christians, are not to call this earth our home. We're not to get too comfortable on this earth because we're only here temporarily. When we realize that we're only passing through and that God has a so much better place for us, you know, God has a place where the streets are paved in pure gold. There'll be no more death, there'll be no more sorrow, there'll be no more crying, and there'll be no more pain. I imagine Brother Leonard is probably taking comfort in these things right now. You know, he's suffering, he's in pain. He can't eat, he can hardly walk. What else is there left? You know, when we realize that our inheritance and our citizenship is in heaven, then maybe that will help us to focus on what God has put us here to do and not so much on what we want to do. You know, I had someone tell me lately that it did not matter to them if it was, and if you're like this, no offense, this is just something else for me. They told me that it didn't matter to them if it was Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. All the days were the same. It didn't matter. He got up and he did the same thing every day, and that's cool. I mean, but obviously they had no schedule. They had no plan. I don't know if they had any goals or not. They certainly didn't have a day of worship. If every day is the same to you, you know, and you don't attend church. I mean, I cannot imagine that. I really can't. God did not create us to live a pointless, meaningless life here on earth. And I'm not saying that this man's life is pointless, but, you know, if every day is identical to you, we're not meant to just wander around here for 70 years or so and then just die, serve ourselves and die. There's a purpose to our existence. The Bible tells us that we were made to glorify God. In Isaiah 43:7, even everyone that I called by my name, for I have created him for my glory. I have formed him, yea, I have made him. In Psalm 100, verse 2 and 3, worship the Lord with gladness, come before his presence with singing. Know ye that the Lord, He is God, and that it is He that hath made us, and not we ourselves. We are His people, and the sheep of His pasture. Everything that we have is His. The earth is His. We are His. We were created to glorify God. We just read earlier from Jeremiah saying, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. You know, last weekend I was fortunate enough to take my family to the Black Hills to go camping. And in Rapid City, it's an hour earlier than it is here. So I'd get up fairly early every morning, and the nights got so cool out there that you needed a heater. We had to turn our heater on several of the nights, and I'd get up early in the morning, I'd fix a big pot of coffee, I'd roll the blind up, and it was just so peaceful and calm. Everybody was sleeping. You know, you'd see a deer running by every now and then, and I'd have a nice cup of coffee with the heat on and spend some good time with God in prayer and in reading and in fellowship. And I felt so close to Him. It's just unbelievable. We did a lot of fun stuff in Rapid City, but this was one of my fondest things that I remember, is getting up and spending time with God. And praise God, it was an inconvenience, but we had no service out there. We could not call on our campsite or anything on a phone. And I'm very glad for that. But when we came back to town, you know, the phone started ringing, people started calling. It was back to reality, and I was like, man. And I'm not a lazy man. I wasn't scared to go back to work. I'm not a lazy man at all. But coming from what I had from that fellowship with God back to this, it was like, man, why am I even doing this? See, you can when you come close to God like that, you come away changed. That's why a lot of people say that Christians are weird. If you get really close with God, God will touch you and you'll be changed. And you're not going to look the same as you did before in the eyes of the world. Suddenly a lot of these things aren't going to matter to you. You know, and it's just my prayer that you would find a place to have that fellowship with God, and that I would continue in that. When we get caught up in life and in the busyness, it's hard to do. It's hard to make room for that. See, sometimes it takes an hour just to find the face of God, just to get your heart right. You can't do this is something you can't do in 10 minutes or 5 minutes a day. But that was free. That was just a wonderful experience. Moving on, in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Paul wrote, I believe, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So we're going to go back to Bill Murray now. He's the oldest son, Bill Murray. See, he was transformed by the renewing of his mind in 1980. He went from a troubled life of alcoholism and depression, from failure and from sin, to a warrior for Jesus. Bill wrote that before his conversion, he had talked to his mother about things like buying x-ray machines and medical equipment for local hospitals that were in desperate need of them. His mother, Madeline, dismissed his ideas immediately and stated that we could use this money to file another lawsuit. Why would we waste it on medical equipment? See, Bill had that desire to do something right. He knew deep inside, despite of what his mother told him, he knew deep inside that there was a God. See, we have that screaming out from inside of us. At this point in his life, Bill had started questioning the things his mother was doing. And he realized that they weren't right, that they had no good or moral purpose. Bill had started to realize that his mother was basically negative and destructive. See, God took what Madeline meant for evil. She wanted to raise her sons atheists, period. And God took what she had meant for evil and He turned it into good. And He is still doing good today. He is still preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I'll tell you in a minute here how she felt about his conversion, or in a few minutes. So let's take a look at Madalyn Murray O'Hair's legacy. It's kind of hard to sum it all up in to tell you, but I thought this would be interesting. I'm going to read to you the lawsuits that she filed through her years as an atheist. And some of them she won, and others she didn't. In 1963, this first one she won, obviously. Challenged Bible reading and prayer recitation in Maryland public schools. In 1964, filed a lawsuit to force the Federal Communications Commission to extend the fairness doctrine so that atheists could have equal time with religion on radio and television. In 1970, she challenged weekly religious services in the White House. In 1971, she challenged NASA's religious use of the space program to require astronauts to read the Bible during a space flight. She was challenging Bible reading in outer space. This is how disturbed she was. She had issues with it. In 1977, she challenged the opening prayer at city council meetings in Austin, Texas. I believe that is where the American Atheist headquarters still are, is in Texas. In 1978, she challenged the inclusion of the phrase "In God We Trust" on U.S. currency. In 1978, to have removed from the Texas Constitution a provision requiring a belief in God of persons holding offices of public trust. So anyone serving the public, anyone holding a public office, had to believe in God. This is what she was challenging. In 1979, she challenged the use of the national park facilities for the Pope to hold a Roman Catholic Mass on the Mall in Washington, D.C. In 1980, this case tried to remove a nativity scene displayed in the rotunda of the Capitol building in Austin, Texas. Anything that had to do with Jesus, with God, she wanted to do away with. In 1984, she challenged the full-time employment of an unordained chaplain at a tax-funded county hospital in Des Moines, Iowa. Who needs a chaplain or a preacher more than the people that are sick and that are dying and in a hospital? And this is what she wanted to do away with. And some of these she won. Some of them were unsuccessful. I didn't mark down what they were. After her first lawsuit, which was in 1963, Madalyn Murray O'Hair received the title as the most hated woman in America. And I think she kind of wore that proudly. She didn't mind. She was known as the most hated. If you said the most hated woman in America in the 70s, they immediately knew who you were talking about. See, all her list of accomplishments, and then her whole life. Her whole life she was challenging prayer and goodness. Anything that had to do with God, she wanted to do away with it. She lived a troubled life. She was in trouble with the IRS through her whole life. You see, she never wanted or loved her two sons. She had longed for them to be female children, and she often expressed her disappointment to them because they were not girls. She used her son Bill as an instrument to remove prayer from public schools, and outside of this, she seemed to have no use for him. Later, while Bill was drafted, Bill is the older one, he started the Religious Freedom Coalition. Later, while Bill was drafted to serve in the United States military, Madalyn took charge of Bill's daughter, Robin Murray, Bill's only child at the time. And while he was deployed to war, she brainwashed her into the point where she hated her own father. And later on, she went on to legally adopt Robin as her own child. She wanted a daughter desperately, and she ended up taking her granddaughter. She took him away from her dad, literally. On August 27 of 1995, O'Hair, her youngest son, John Garth Murray, and granddaughter, Robin Murray, mysteriously disappeared, never to be seen alive again. Over 5 years later, authorities discovered the remains of the trio about 90 miles west of San Antonio, Texas, on an old farmstead. Robin Murray had lived to be only 30 years old. So this is what she did to her son. She took her daughter, and they ultimately ended up getting murdered. See, Madeline had surrounded herself with ex-cons. She'd surrounded herself with people that she knew were bitter and unrepentant, just like herself. It was one of these ex-cons named David Waters, a fellow atheist and also a former employee of American Atheist, that kidnapped them and held them for extortion and then brutally murdered them. While Bill Murray says that after his conversion he learned to love his mother, Madeline released the following statement about Bill's conversion. And I quote, this is her statement. "One could call this a postnatal abortion on the part of a mother, I guess. I repudiate him entirely and completely, for now and all times he is beyond human forgiveness." This is the statement she released about her oldest son after he became born again. He is beyond human forgiveness. Like, what did she know about forgiveness, right? Madeline left behind a legacy of death. When it really comes down to it, sin and everything she stood for is death. You can kind of sum it up in one word, and that's death. She left behind a legacy of death. She spent her whole life fighting against everything that was good and right, and she went into eternity to stand before the God that she so vehemently had denied her whole life. Imagine if she would have just surrendered to what God had for her. God had a plan for her. He had a purpose for her. He had a calling for her before she was born into this earth, and she fought him hand and foot her whole life. You know, just imagine what she could have done for the good. She was a powerful woman. She was actually, she received attention immediately. She actually had a gift. She could go in front of people and they would listen. She was kind of loud, and she made a strong appearance. She could have probably reached so many people for Christ, but instead she chose to go after Satan. So what about our legacy today? What are we going to leave behind? You know, I don't know what specific thing God has called you to do in your life, but I know that we need to give God our time, and we need to be faithful to Him. And we need to seek His face through prayer, and He will reveal His plan for our lives. You know, God will never just dump a whole load of responsibility on us. He'll never give us more than we can handle. He won't just go take a baby Christian and say, well, I want you to go and start preaching and do this or something that individual is not able to handle. I know that in my life, I was wondering, I was praying about it. This was several years ago, and I said, God, why don't you show me anything in my life? What do you want me to do? And He had showed me really small things that I was not obedient in. And He said, until you can obey these small things, to me they seemed unimportant. He said, until you can obey these small things, I can't use you. I don't have anything else for you to do. And a small thing could be praying. If you don't spend time praying or reading the Bible, you know, that's kind of our basic starting ground to find God's will for our lives. I want to read a few verses in Ecclesiastes. This is kind of what Solomon had everything. He had everything you could get on this earth, and he realized it didn't make him happy. And he started questioning it. In chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes, it's about 6 verses here. I made me great works, I builded me houses, I planted me vineyards. I made me gardens and orchards, and I planted trees in them of all kinds of fruit. I made me pools of water to water therewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. I got me servants and maidens, and had servants born in my house. Also I had great possessions of great and small cattle, above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasure of kings and his provinces. I got me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men, as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. I was great, and increased more than all they that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor, Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. Vanity means worthlessness. Worthlessness, all these things. He was to this day the richest man on earth. He had everything. He said, whatever I desired, I didn't hold it back. He had everything. And he realized it did not make him happy. On a brighter note, he also wrote this, just a couple of verses later. There is nothing better for a man that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy the good of his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. So it's okay to enjoy our possessions and to enjoy our things here on earth, but we have to look at the bigger picture. We can't get caught up in that stuff. And I had just happened to read Ecclesiastes, and and Solomon starts out almost, I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for, he's frustrated. He has all this stuff, he has all these things, he has all these wives, and he has all this, and he's not happy, and it cannot bring happiness, and he calls it vanity, he calls it worthless. And he did make his peace with God, and he knows where happiness comes from. So, in closing, I'm going to be brief today. This is what Solomon said in conclusion, in the last two verses of Ecclesiastes. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or evil. So hopefully this is probably nothing that you guys didn't already know. But we get so busy, especially in the summertime. There's so much going on. We see other people prospering and doing things, and we get caught up in life. It's, I don't blame anyone for doing that. We see it. It's all around us. We get caught up in life, and hopefully this will kind of help us to snap back and to remember what God has put us here for and what our purpose in life is for. If anyone would want to pray later on, feel free to come on up. Maybe we should open up the altar too, and if somebody would want to come up and just pray and just get close to God, maybe we could take 10 or 15 minutes to do that. And just pray and just seek his face. We've got a little bit of time, so why don't we do that? Why don't we just find a place to pray and seek God?